It was an early morning in Los Angeles, and the city was still waking up. Keanu Reeves had just finished his morning run and was walking through the familiar streets, his steps slow and deliberate. The sun had only begun to rise, casting a soft orange light that stretched across the quiet neighborhood. The morning was crisp, and the streets were unusually empty, as most of the city still lay in slumber. Keanu had always appreciated these moments of solitude. It allowed him to clear his mind, reflect on his life, and just enjoy the stillness before the chaos of the day began. As he walked, his thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a woman sitting on the curb near a small cafe. She looked out of place in this quiet scene, her worn coat barely offering any warmth against the morning chill. She was sitting with her legs curled beneath her, holding a sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." Keanu slowed his pace, his eyes drawn to her. There was something about her, something in the way she sat so still, her posture defeated but somehow dignified. She didn't shout or wave the sign in anyone's face. She simply sat there, waiting, as if she had long given up on hoping for help, yet still held on to the faintest shred of possibility. As Keanu approached, their eyes met for the briefest of moments. It wasn't an intense stare or a long gaze, but a quiet acknowledgement. The woman's eyes seemed tired, weary of the world, yet there was something unspoken in them, a glimmer of strength behind her exhaustion. Keanu stopped in front of her, crouching down to her level. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm, not rushed, as though he truly wanted to understand what was going on. "Are you okay?" For a moment, the woman seemed surprised that someone had stopped. Most people, as Keanu knew all too well, would simply walk past without a second thought. She looked up at him with a mixture of suspicion and hope. Could it be that someone, anyone, was finally acknowledging her? Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. The silence between them felt heavy. I'm not sure what to say," the woman finally murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's okay," Keanu responded, his tone warm and gentle. "I don't expect you to say anything. I just wanted to check in on you. My name's Keanu." The woman blinked at him, her expression confused. "Keanu?" she asked, her voice incredulous. "As in Keanu Reeves?" Keanu smiled softly, nodding. "Yeah, that's me. But don't worry, I'm not here as an actor. I'm just a guy walking through this part of town, and I saw you sitting here." For a brief moment, the woman seemed stunned. She hadn't expected this, and neither had she expected the man she had recognized from movies to stop and talk to her. She had spent so many days on the streets, her pride battered by the indifference of passers-by, and now here was this man who could be anywhere in the world, choosing to speak to her like she was a real person. "My name's Emily," she finally said, her voice shaky. I didn't expect anyone to talk to me." "I know how that feels," Keanu said quietly, his gaze understanding. "Sometimes it feels like the world forgets about you, but you're not forgotten." Emily looked up at him, her heart fluttering with the strange mix of disbelief and hope that had suddenly begun to swell inside her. Could it really be that someone famous like Keanu Reeves, someone who had everything, was actually taking the time to listen to her? "I've been on the streets for a while now," Emily continued, her voice cracking. "It's not easy, you know. I used to have a good job, a home, but everything just fell apart. Now I'm here." Keanu nodded. He wasn't surprised. The stories were all too familiar. There were so many people in the world who had once had everything and lost it all, either through circumstance or misfortune, sometimes through their own choices. But Keanu wasn't here to judge. He was here to listen. "I know it's hard," he said gently, sitting down beside her on the curb. "But there's always a way forward, even when you don't see it. Sometimes it's about finding the right moment, the right help." Emily stared at him, unsure how to react. Here she was, a woman who had been wandering the streets, sleeping in shelters, begging for spare change, and now she was sitting next to one of the most famous actors in the world. She couldn't quite grasp the reality of it. "You don't know me," Emily whispered, "but I don't know how to get out of this mess. I don't know where to even start." Keanu looked at her with a mixture of empathy and calmness. "It's okay not to know where to start, but you've already taken the first step by speaking to me. Sometimes that's all it takes. A small step forward." Emily looked down at the sign she had been holding, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edges of the cardboard. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She had cried so many times before. Now she felt something different, maybe even a spark of hope. Keanu had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. That was a rare gift. "I don't know if I can believe that," she whispered. "I've been so lost for so long." Keanu's eyes softened. He had seen the despair in people before, seen it in his own life at times. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a few kind words. But sometimes all it took was a small gesture to remind someone that they weren't alone. "You don't have to believe it all at once," he said gently. "But I promise you, there is a way. You just need to take it one step at a time." Emily nodded, unsure whether to believe him or not, but something in his voice made her want to try. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. Keanu stood up, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Emily watched in disbelief as he spoke to someone on the other end, making arrangements that she couldn't quite follow. When he finished, he turned back to her, his expression serious but hopeful. "I've made a few calls," he said. "There's a shelter nearby, just a few blocks away. They've got a place for you to stay for now. Food, a bed, and they'll help you get back on your feet." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It sounded too good to be true. "Really?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hope and skepticism. Keanu nodded. "Yes, really. I'll take you there if you'd like, but it's up to you. It's a start." Emily didn't know what to say. She looked up at him, not sure if she should trust this kindness or not. But then she remembered what he had said. Sometimes the first step is the hardest, but it's the one that matters most. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll go." Emily stood up slowly, her knees creaking in protest from days of sitting on the cold pavement. The weight of her situation had become almost too much to bear, but there was something about Keanu's quiet presence that made her feel as though there was a way out. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was invisible, like she was just another face lost in the crowd of the homeless population. Keanu smiled at her gently, extending his arm as if guiding her down a new path. "Let's get you settled, Emily, one step at a time." She nodded, though her mind was still in a state of disbelief. She hadn't been expecting this. She hadn't been expecting anyone to stop, let alone someone with such a busy, public life to take time out of his day for her. He had treated her like a human being, not a charity case, not a problem, but a person worthy of kindness. As they walked down the sidewalk together, Emily felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. She wasn't sure what to expect from the shelter Keanu had mentioned. Would it be cold, dark, and unfriendly like so many others she'd experienced before? Would the people there look down on her? Would she even be able to trust the help they offered? Keanu, sensing her hesitation, kept the conversation light and easy. "I know this doesn't feel like much, but it's a start. I promise, these people at the shelter are good. They won't judge you." Emily could only nod. Her mouth felt dry as the thoughts swirled in her head. The overwhelming sense of shame that came from being homeless was a constant weight, and even though Keanu's words were comforting, she still couldn't quite let go of the doubts. They reached the shelter after a short walk, a modest building nestled between a few run-down shops. It wasn't the most glamorous place, but it was warm, inviting, and full of the kind of quiet comfort Emily had been missing for so long. Keanu led her inside, where a woman behind the counter greeted them with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Jane and asked Emily to fill out some basic information. Keanu stood by her side the entire time, his presence a steadying force. When Emily hesitated over a question asking for her previous address, Keanu leaned in and gently reassured her. "It's okay. Just write, 'No permanent address' if you don't have one." The simplicity of the suggestion made Emily want to cry. She had been so caught up in the idea that everything had to be perfect that she had to have everything together. Keanu made it feel like it was okay to not have all the answers, to not be okay. It was a relief. Once the paperwork was done, Jane led Emily to a small room where she would stay for the night. It wasn't much, just a simple cot with clean sheets and a small desk, but it felt like a palace compared to the cold streets. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Keanu gave her a soft smile, his eyes kind but firm. "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of yourself, all right?" "I will," she said, more to herself than to him. Keanu gave her one last reassuring glance before turning to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at her. "If you need anything, just ask. There are people here who care, and there's always a way forward. You just need to keep looking for it." With that, he was gone. Emily sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the door for a long moment before the weight of everything began to sink in. She was in a safe place. She was not alone, and she had the chance to rebuild her life. The next few days were a blur of small adjustments. Emily started to settle into the rhythm of the shelter. She had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and the promise of something more. The shelter's staff was kind, but they were busy, so Emily knew that her path forward would ultimately depend on her own efforts. At first it felt strange to have her own space, however temporary. For so long she had been fighting just to survive, to find a place to sleep each night. She hadn't had the luxury of thinking about what came next, but now she was being given that chance. One morning, Emily woke up early and decided to take a walk around the area. It was still early enough that the streets weren't too crowded, and she could think without too many distractions. As she wandered, she couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past week, the day Keanu had stopped, the kindness he had shown her, and the strange sense of relief that had come with stepping into the shelter. She hadn't expected her life to change so drastically, so quickly. But it was as though one simple act of kindness had turned the whole tide of her existence. Keanu had given her more than just a roof. He had given her back the belief that there was good in the world, that there was hope even in the darkest times. A few days later, Emily met with a caseworker at the shelter who helped her fill out job applications and connect with local organizations that provided training programs. The woman, whose name was Sarah, sat with Emily for hours, helping her navigate through the process. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like someone believed in her, like she had a real shot at starting over. "It's not going to be easy," Sarah said, handing her a stack of papers. "But I know you can do it. You've made it this far, and that's something to be proud of." Emily smiled, though it felt strange. She wasn't used to hearing words like that. She had been so focused on survival that she hadn't allowed herself to believe in a future beyond the next day. But here, now, in the safety of this new space, it felt like maybe she could take the first steps towards something better. As the days passed, Emily began to feel stronger. The anger and bitterness that had once filled her heart were slowly being replaced by something more productive: determination, hope, and a quiet sense of resilience. She had moments of doubt, moments where she questioned whether it was all too good to be true. But then she would remember Keanu's words. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, she was beginning to see a future at all. Weeks passed, and Emily found herself gaining confidence. She had secured a part-time job at a local cafe, helping with prep work and serving food. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She was able to save a little money each week, enough to eventually get a small apartment. One afternoon, as she was walking through the park on her break, Emily couldn't believe it when she saw a familiar face. It was Keanu sitting on a bench, looking out over the lake. He turned and saw her, his face breaking into a warm smile as she approached. "Emily," he said, standing up, "how are you doing?" "I'm doing better," she said, smiling shyly. "I got a job, a place to stay. Things are looking up." Keanu's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that. You're doing the hard work now, but it looks like you're getting there." "I couldn't have done it without you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed everything for me, just by being kind." Keanu shook his head. "You did all the hard work. I just gave you a nudge in the right direction." Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she realized how far she had come. In the weeks since Keanu had stopped to help her, her life had transformed. She had found her footing again, not just through the help of a stranger, but through her own strength and determination. "I'll never forget what you did for me," she said, her voice breaking. "You gave me the chance I didn't even know I needed." Keanu smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did the rest. I just gave you the space to see it." As they said goodbye, Emily walked away with a heart full of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. Keanu had shown her that even in a world that often feels indifferent, one act of kindness can change everything.